Well, yeah, so this is the program with the funding, crowdfunding, experiencing running a game Kickstarter campaign. And as Jesper already told you, I am Dan Christensen. I'm the CEO at Galdra Studios, and in the studio located here in Aalborg, who make narrative-driven games. Arcadia Fallen is our debut game, which we ran a Kickstarter for back in the summer of 2020. And we expect the game to be released later this year. I also went to Aalborg University here in the city. And between working full-time in Galdra Studios and when I graduated, I worked there 1.5 years for Science at Home in Aarhus, who make games for science. So I got some experience from there before I went out on this whole endeavor. So you don't need to have watched these videos to follow my presentation, but instead of repeating fundamental information that is already available in 2 30-minute videos, I will instead focus on the things we had to learn ourselves and only repeat the things that are necessary. So you should definitely go watch these 2 videos after, and of course you will have access to the slides that will be shared afterwards. So if you don't write it down now, you can make sure that you have them for later, but you can find these 2 videos on YouTube there for free. So the first thing I want to do is start by debunking a few of the most dangerous assumptions around Kickstarter. And it can fund my game. The goal was around 2013, ended a long time ago. And unless you're already a big shot, it's not feasible to fund your whole production using Kickstarter. The people who can play by different rules because they have a track record, established fan base counting millions. Many of your potential backers also know this. And some will even expect the game to be released even if you don't make your goal. So saying that the campaign is to fund your game production will ring hollow to some as well. Instead, funding an expense that you cannot afford without the success of your campaign, which will improve the quality of your game significantly and make your game your goal about that. In our case, this was voice acting. It's easy money. It really is not easy money. Our campaign took us over half a year to plan for, and running it was the toughest month of my entire life until now. It is charity. It is also not charity. People are investing in your success and expect to get something in return for that investment. For most, that just means getting the game on release, but in general, it means that every reward should be one-to-one value for the money that people pledge for backing your game, or better, for the backer. I don't need a community. You most certainly need a community. You need to build a community before you start your Kickstarter campaign. You must strike while the iron is hot, but that entails actually having any iron to work with. Sure, Kickstarter will bring some attention to your campaign, but even they will give less exposure to you if you don't bring your own community. Kickstarter is a business, and their users have a finite amount of money they spend on the platform, money that Kickstarter will rather have them use in places that is most favorable to them. This could be projects that help them establish their brand as a company that helps out creative projects. It could also fit with the current zeitgeist. And it could also just be people who bring new people to the platform who in turn are likely to use more money on it. So planning your Kickstarter, we like to see, we like to think of a Kickstarter campaign like an ARG. It needs to be a fun and engaging happening that backers wish to be a part in. Appeal to your audience, not just everybody and everyone. You need to know who your audience are and appeal to them deliberately. You can't just throw everything against the wall and see what sticks during your campaign. You need to aim for that particular bullseye and then split the arrow consistently. Least you want to appear wishy-washy. If you attempt to appeal to everybody, you will appeal to no one, because people won't understand who your game is for, and it will seem like you're just interested in whoever is interested in giving you money, rather than making a game for a particular audience. Expand your existing community. This feeds into my previous point that you need a community, because a Kickstarter campaign is just as much about discoverability as it is money, if not more. You need to design for it. If you and I will give some examples throughout the presentation. If you're doing a Kickstarter just for the money, you're doing it for the wrong reasons. Make allies. So one way we did this was to commission artists we believed had a similar audience as ours, and have them share the work with their community. If it's a good match, you will recuperate your costs, and you will now have some cool artwork to share with your community as well. Influencers are another type of ally that will boost your discoverability by writing about your campaign and playing and your playable demo, if you have one. These also help make sure that people can find your game when they search for it on different social media platforms and on the web. People won't find your game if it's nowhere to be found. And having people write about it is important to give the game some weight before its release. Another thing we did was reach out to voice actors and performing the auditions for roles prior to the campaign. Again, if there's a good match in audience, your allies will want to endorse your campaign at no extra charge, because they wish to be affiliated with your project and share your campaign. And sharing your campaign is good content for their followers. These images are some of the games our collaborators are known for, but not all of them were mentioned on our Kickstarter, because only some of them are relevant to our audience. For a studio without any track record, getting endorsements from audience ambassadors can be crucial to your success. If someone loves one of your allies for their previous work and you pay them good money, or the money raised will be used to pay them, that someone will likely love to support you by proxy as well. The same goes for endorsements, endorsing other projects on Kickstarter with a similar audience. For instance, we traded endorsements with In Blood. If a particular backer is likely to back one project, they are also likely to back another. We don't have to fear that you're losing backers to one another. But you do want to be wary of whether the audiences and the quality of the games match. Otherwise, it can be a one-sided thing. Another good thing about such allies is that it shows your audience that you are friends with other projects in the community, which in turn shows that you care for the community. And of course, you care about your community, but it doesn't matter for your campaign if your audience isn't convinced of it. During your campaign, you can also expect to be contacted by a lot of desperate types who want your endorsement, your help, but foremost your money. These are not your allies, and you shouldn't engage them. Don't be fooled into thinking some random stranger on the internet is better at selling your Kickstarter than you are, as though all Kickstarters are the same and can be sold to the same people. This is the infamous "I just need anybody and everybody" sort of narrative I spoke of earlier, that they are trying to push on you. Because a lot of people on Kickstarter are desperate to succeed, but you shouldn't act desperate. Be cool, rally your audience around your ARG, and take charge over your own success. It's okay to run ads for your project, but do so yourself. It's more earnest that way, and you can use the experience to gain the experience you gain for your release campaign in the future. Don't be needy or desperate, because Kickstarter revolves around raising an often optimistic amount of money within a limited time frame, and you do in fact need the money, and you are in fact desperate for it. I can see why people feel inclined to use it in their rhetoric as well, but don't. It's not a good experience when someone instills negative emotions in an attempt to make you overspend. You might succeed in making some overspend, but you also deter others from supporting you, and the tone of your ARG will be tarnished. don't be an ingrate. If you fear you might not make your goal, it's much easier to recover from a failed campaign if you make it a spectacle. So for the next part, I will go into breaking down our campaign page to give you some concrete examples of what we did when considering our design. So your title and subtitle can be changed at any time, and determine which search results your projects will appear in on the Kickstarter platform. Again, be decisive in how you appeal to your audience. For instance, Arcadia Fallen contains puzzle elements, and while they are sure to be enjoyable to players who love puzzle games, the game is not a puzzle game. Calling it a puzzle game will set expectations that the game is primarily a puzzle game, which wouldn't be to our advantage. Someone who loves puzzle games and likes visual novels is more inclined to love our game if they find it thinking it's a visual novel and learn that it also has puzzle elements, than if they thought it was a puzzle game and then it turns out to be a visual novel. While someone who loves puzzles and dislikes visual novels might hate our game in turn. Let's see. You don't want to disappoint or trick people into looking up your game. That's the fastest way of getting mixed reviews on Steam. And you also risk being perceived as dishonest and desperate. Let's see, I have a note here I'm missing. There we go. For your video on banner, yeah, I suggest looking at what other similar campaigns do. One thing to be wary of, though, is that the rest of the page should be able to stand without the video, because a significant amount of your visitors won't watch it. And for the currency, as a Danish company, you will have the option to choose between euro and Danish crowns. We didn't have the option, but if we had the option today, we would still go with Danish crowns. It really depends on your game and what your narrative. And for us, it was important to tell people that this is a Danish game and that the story in the game is inspired by Danish folklore and such. So for us, the Danish value was important to show, rather than showing something like we're European. It was important to show that we're Danish. But it might be different for your own project. Some people don't think about this, but your creator profile can say a lot about you. And some Kickstarter users will judge you on your creator profile alone if it falls short. If you haven't backed at least a few games on your personal profile, don't use it for your campaign. Instead, create a company account for the campaign that you don't use for backing projects. In fact, create a company account anyway, as some find this practice more professional in a good way. If you have a personal account that has backed many projects, add them as a collaborator on the project. If they have backed relevant projects, let them be shown. Otherwise, hide them and allow yourself the benefit of the doubt that you may have backed similar projects. Some users won't help projects that are not part of the community. And the best thing you can do is to show that you are. And if you can't, at least don't confirm their suspicion by using a personal profile that never backed a project or only ever backed projects that has nothing to do with your own audience. I believe you should have a playable demo as well. Many backers expect there to be a demo, though most of them won't actually play it. Without a public demo, you also won't be able to get nearly the same amount of attention from influencers and gaming news websites that might cover your game if they could play the demo. So having a demo available is beneficial to your campaign and your community building. So the story is what Kickstarter calls the body of your campaign. And I'll go through ours from the top down. What you usually put in the top depends a bit on the campaign, but for most games, you would like to put gameplay at the very top of the game, of your story. But for our particular case, we chose to instead show our collaboration with these great voice actors that we got on the project. And when you do show footage of the game, you want to use GIFs so that they actually play, they can see how it actually looks in the game. And you want to use as few GIFs to show as many features as possible. And having gameplay in your video is no excuse for not using GIFs on your story. You need to do it. It is the only way that a lot of people will actually look at your campaign. If they don't see any GIFs playing that can instantly, get them an idea of how this play might play when they're browsing your story, they will leave immediately. You also need to make assets that better show off your tiers and rewards than the column of the right of your campaign. This is where the concept of KISS really comes into play. Keep it simple, stupid. Every interaction and effort a potential backer needs to make will deplete their interest in your campaign. And if they need to navigate a spreadsheet in order to understand the options for backing your game, the simpler option is that they won't. Fewer options sell more because it requires less of your backer to make up their mind. And they're also more likely to be happy with their decision. Buyer's remorse is one hell of a thing that you need to take into account for your ARG. If you're not familiar with the term buyer's remorse, you should look it up afterwards. There are many options on how to design your tiers. And here's another opinion. I'm a firm believer that you should always consider the perceived value of your game. For instance, if you think your game is worth $20, make it the $20 reward. $20 is a popular reward tier, and ours was set at approximately $20 as well, before the dollar dropped a staggering 5% during our campaign, which did not do wonders for our campaign either. But I digress. Instead of giving a discount on your game, give them something extra, like the soundtrack, access to exclusive Discord channels, and or the name in the credits. The concept is simple. Give backers a significant discount on the game and will be perceived as a discount game. Give them the game at what could be or near market price, and you tell them that this is a quality product. Relative value goes for tiers as well. And to make the most of it, you should have tiers built on previous ones, like we have here. This makes it easier for your backers to gauge the relative value of the extra rewards they get when they go between tiers. Not all our tier rewards were linear, though. When you got from physical rewards, when you got two physical rewards, backers could choose between getting the art book or the game. But immediately after, you got both in the same tier, and it becomes linear again from there. And because we changed the category from digital to physical, it allowed us to reference back to just saying that both the art book tier and the game tier would get you all the previous digital rewards, which keeps it simple. Furthermore, because the total increase in pledge for getting the art book and the game tier is higher than the increase from going from the digital rewards to the supporter pack, the bagger will perceive a relative savings in going for having them together instead of having them just either of them. I like to see this tier design as a flight of stairs where all the potential backer has to do is consider the immediate upgrade and whether they wish to take a step further up the stairs or stay. At some point, the reward will be less interesting or too expensive, and the backer will decide to stop. And that is the tier that is the right one for them. Early bird tiers are another kind of tier that are not linear. These are often strictly better versions of an existing tier. But in our case, they weren't, because similar to how I believe you should price your game, I am also of the controversial belief that you shouldn't give discounts either. The issue with a discount is that it's strictly better. So potential backers will feel like they were late for the party, so to speak, and decide not to participate at all, maybe. This goes double for early bird discounts on your primary get the game tier, as this will cause some potential backers to go, I'll just get the game next time it's on sale on Steam, which is terrible. Don't give discounts. Instead, give them something of relative value, like a physical add-on that could also be bought on the side of any physical rewards in our case. Physical rewards are dope. If they miss an opportunity to get one for free, they are much more likely to go instead, did I actually want it? And if they decide that they did and they can buy it on the side, they still have the option to do so. This approach works best for tiers with physical rewards, because they already with tiers that already has physical rewards, because they already have the postal factored in. But in general, early birds just work better for physical rewards and tiers with physical rewards, as using early birds for those kind of rewards will drive up the initial order count of said items in the rewards, which will help keep production costs for the rewards lower as a whole. Another thing to consider when designing a nice tier staircase for your backer is to categorize them into digital, physical, and design tiers. Digital are tiers that are strictly so. No physical rewards that are required, and no postal, and should all be placed as the most cheap options available. Next are the physical category, which has all the previous digital rewards, at least in our case, and rewards that need postal. So, and potential all-inclusive digital rewards. So you can also have extra digital rewards with your physical tier, that's okay. But the thing is to distinguish between them, because people who are more likely to want to pay more are also more likely to actually want the physical stuff. So if you start to mix them all around, you will sometimes give physical stuff to people who don't care for it anyway, and that might actually discourage them because they don't like the reward that you're giving them. They don't want to have the physical thing. So you want to have all the neat digital rewards first, then come with all the neat physical rewards, and then finally you have the design options, which some may not want, because the design options are options that allows the players actual agency over the design of your game. You allow them in, and you cannot. These can be significantly expensive, but the idea is that I think you should have them, because even people who don't care about them or can't afford them will appreciate the fact that you're allowing the community to actually have a creative input in your game. Some campaigns only have digital rewards, but this will also harm your potential, as backers are more willing to pay more for physical and design rewards. Digital rewards for our campaign made up approximately half of our money raised, while physical rewards were 30% and design rewards were 20%. So without those, we would effectively possibly have cut our funding in half. Add-ons are essentially rewards that are bought on the side of a tier, which may or may not be an intrinsic part of some tiers as well on early bird. These also help with relative value because they allow potential backers to see the price of each of them individually. Here you see the charms used for our early bird tier. And because a potential backer can see the value of a single charm, it gives the early bird reward a relative value instead of an abstract value, which is fundamental to our reward design. Any reward the backer cannot get a unit price of becomes abstract, which is more difficult to gauge. An example would be the physical art book and game reward tiers from before. Either of those tiers get you all the digital rewards and the respective add-on at a slight discount. So you actually get the book and you get the game cheaper than you get them if you buy them on the side as an add-on. But without them being able to perceive the unit price of the game and the book, they wouldn't have perceived that they actually were getting a discount. And also, because we're getting them slight discounts on either of those tiers, it makes the support pack tier seem even more significant in the discount that you're getting from actually buying these things together. So stretch goals. The first rule of stretch goals is that you do not post stretch goals before your campaign is funded. And the second rule of stretch goals is that you do not post your stretch goals before your campaign is funded. Anyone who knows what's good for you and who did their research right knows this. The reason are plenty. When you post them up front, you potentially expose stretch goals that would seem intrinsic to the game design for some. If a potential backer expects, say, couch co-op to be in your game, and they see it as a stretch goal that they don't believe you can make, they might not back your game at all. It will also warp people's perception of what your actual goal is, making it seem harder to reach, which will in turn harm motivation among your backers. It can also expose potential unrealistic expectations for what could turn out to be a mediocre campaign. If you put out insanely optimistic stretch goals and then only barely make it over the finishing line, this will reflect badly on your campaign performance because of the lofty stretch goals that you made, only because of the lofty stretch goals. Furthermore, if you put them out prematurely, just to take them back later when you realize your mistake, you will come across as disingenuous, which is also a terrible look for you and your campaign. A lot of late backers see your campaign during the first 2 days, and they will notice if stretch goals suddenly disappear or change during the campaign. Releasing stretch goals after you are funded will give you time to react to the popularity and the momentum of your campaign and allow you to design stretch goals accordingly. For most genres of games, backers even expect stretch goals and will chase for the finishing line in order to see what you might reveal. So you can also use it to actually get people more motivated in your game. Far from all campaigns have community goals, but also far from all people manage to utilize their campaign's potential for discoverability. I've seen many examples of community goals, and I can also honestly say that I believe ours is the most successful that I at least know of. Community goals are crucial to the AIG feel of the campaign, and is how you motivate people to invest motivate people interested in your game to participate, whether they have exposable income or not, because you don't need money to help with the community goals. You don't need money in order to back. And there's a lot of people potentially who do not have exposable income who do want to see your game succeed. If backers have a surplus of excitement for your game, this is where you encourage them to use it in the way that is most favorable to you. On the right, you can see that we have rewarded players different numbers of hearts for different actions that spread the word of the game and our campaign. These are then pooled together, and as long as the game was funded, everybody in the community would receive additional rewards. It's important that the community rewards benefit everyone, not just particular tiers or other segments of the community, as this will discourage the community, those community members who are not part of those groups from participating. It's essential. It's a shared effort and shared reward. Another benefit of community rewards is that you can encourage fan art in a way that doesn't appear forced. To give you some examples of how not to do your community goals, here are two examples. They both featured the same fundamental issue, and none of them made their first community goal beyond being funded. Their rewards are threshold based, which means a backer's engagement is pointless unless they can expect another 499 people to also follow you on Twitter or like your post, for instance, which will discourage participation. Going back to our own design for a moment, you can see each individual engagement has a weighted, meaningful value that immediately benefits the community. Outreach is worth money, money that the community will save you by helping spreading the word, money that can be reinvested into the community by giving them meaningful improvements to the game. So don't be stingy with your community rewards either. These are things you want to give them. The whole purpose of the ARG is to exalt your community and encourage unification around a single purpose, which is to lift the quality and success of your game. And also make sure to put your social links right underneath the community goals, so it's easy for them to find the links that are necessary in order for them to help you. If it's difficult for them, they won't. Also, make sure to show the team as well. Some campaigns use photos, others use drawing or abstract figures, and it's really up to what you believe will give the best impression of your team. It's the important bit here is the human aspect, because they're not just supporting the game, they're also supporting you, and you need to show them that they're right to do so. And some might feel more inclined to back your campaign if they make a connection with who you are as a person. Here, representation can also be important. I already mentioned that running our campaign was the toughest month of my life. And if you do make a Kickstarter campaign, it will probably also be a really tough month for you. Your Kickstarter page will become a time capsule that you want to look its best. Talking about striking while the iron is hot, whatever you manage to make out of that iron will reflect on your game and your studios for years to come. And you want to make the best of it and the best of your time. And that means you have to be prepared and have content ready for everything that can happen ahead of time. If you don't, you won't have the time to respond to things like whether someone retweets about your game or there comes an amazing review out that you have to pick up on. Ideally, you didn't have to sleep, but because we do need to sleep, you will need to do night shifts as well. Half of our backers are from the US, and likely most of yours will be as well. And that means a lot of the activity you need to respond to will happen during the night. And you need to have someone ready if your campaign suddenly takes off. Another thing to be wary of is something I've dubbed the undercurrent. It's the effect of early backers who cancel their pledge during the campaign. Counterintuitively, the undercurrent is a good thing for you because it's a symptom of the initial 48 hours hour wave having been bigger than it should have been. And that extra height gives more exposure on Kickstarter and elsewhere. And it also makes people more excited about the campaign in general. The undercurrent is often most prominent during the stale mid-drag of your campaign, because even though you're likely to get quite a few backers, you will lose some as well. And the undercurrent makes this stale part tough on everybody who is engaged in your campaign. A thing to consider in order to lessen the impact of the undercurrent is to never have reward cost more than approximately 1% of the goal, I think, something like that maybe. As higher tiers seem more likely to get returned later, especially higher early bird tiers, the backers might reserve and then later decide they didn't want. Another reason to avoid disproportionate tiers is that people can back out of their pledge after the campaign has ended, and the payment will simply bounce. You will have nothing to show for it, no money, and the total amount of pledge for your campaign doesn't change. I believe we lost around 1 or 2% of our total funding to this. But if you miss out on someone who pledged 10% of your entire budget, it can be devastating to a campaign. If you've ever wondered why some funded projects get canceled after they were funded, something like this might be why. If you have friends and family who wish to help your campaign, I also suggest planning ahead and tell them not to back your game in the first 1 or 2 weeks of the campaign. If your campaign is highly successful in the beginning, some backers will back out again, thinking you didn't really need their support. And that means your friends and family will effectively have pushed out other backers and created a stronger undercurrent. Instead, you want to coordinate with them to back your project during the stale period. During your Kickstarter is also an excellent time to experiment with how to sell your game in an ad. Using ad doesn't make you a sellout. It's not your audiences. It's not on your audience to find your game. It's on you. Gamers already go to great lengths to find the games that they can invest themselves in. And by running ads, you're making it easier for them. Ideally, you should already have run ads on Twitter or similar to see what your audiences respond to in a selling pitch, and also to build your following. Twitter is great for this because you can target followers of accounts by other game companies or other games entirely. And by doing A/B testing, you can see which communities your game resonates with, and how they wish to be approached and what sort of language they respond to. If you're not familiar with A/B testing, that's another thing you should look up. There's nothing wrong with running ads as long as you put in the work to make a great ad. People hate ads. If you manage to make something that your audience responds well to, you know you're hitting the mark. And again, aim for the audience, not just anyone and everybody. Don't be the digital version of a facer, those people down on the street who approach random people on just to sell them anything and don't care who you are or what you are interested in, as long as you have a pulse and exposable income. Don't be those guys. Be the digital version of someone who paid for a booth at a convention so you get to meet with your audience in person. Be that guy. Make that kind of ad. we used Reddit for advertising our Kickstarter campaign. And what's great about this particular platform is that you have the upvote and downvote feedback, which allows you to gauge whether your ad is generally well received by those who see it. For instance, ours, it wasn't until my 9th attempt that I managed to make something that was generally well received. The ads, though, like our commissions for artists, paid for themselves. Building on the knowledge we gained from our Kickstarter campaign, this is how our ads look today. Pretty similar, and they help with building our wish listings and the anticipation for our game prior to release. The last thing I want to touch upon is pre-launch. It shouldn't come as a surprise to people, in particular your community, that you're doing a Kickstarter for the project. Announce the Kickstarter a month before and pre-launch it a week or so before it actually goes live. People can follow a pre-launch campaign from a link, but it won't be pushed on Kickstarter. And they can see they can see the banner, they can see the creator profile and titles. And you can share it on social media, which will allow your existing community to follow the campaign ahead of time, which means they're ready when it starts. You need to have your runners in position for when the race starts. And the first 48 hours are so important that you cannot afford for people to be unorganized and taken by surprise. Share the link with your friends and family, share it with your allies as well. When you get to 10 followers, the follow count will become public as well. And you want to drive up the number to increase expectations. Likewise, you want to create trusted links for your campaign where someone can see the whole campaign before it goes live. Share it with your trusted people who can help you. Ideally, you trust someone who is part of your audience that can take a look at it, and maybe someone with experience running a Kickstarter, someone who ran a successful Kickstarter in the past. Make sure to get some feedback on it. Kickstarters even have workers who help specifically with game campaigns that you can find through the website. Send it to them as well. This will also increase the chance that you get to be featured by a Kickstarter. If you are not proactive and send your campaign to people at Kickstarter, you cannot expect them to care about your campaign. You're also welcome to send it to me. I probably have time to give it a gander and give you some feedback before it goes live as well. So in conclusion, a Kickstarter is about so much more than just the money. And you must consider the longevity when you plan and run your campaign. How players will experience your game isn't limited to the game itself. And what you do and inspire around your game and during your Kickstarter will inevitably affect players and allies' perception of you and your game. You reap what you sow. And if you sow negative emotion through acts of greed or desperation, they are more likely to regret supporting you. In this ARG and beyond, how you lead and what you inspire in the people around you can be the difference between whether someone will follow you to the ends of the earth or kick you to the curb. Thank you for listening to my presentation. Thomas, do we have any time for questions? Do we have questions?
We have quite a few questions actually, Daniel. We went a bit over time.
Thomas here?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Jesper?
Daniel?
Oh, I lost my audio. That's what's wrong. Never mind.
Okay.
Give me a moment.
Okay, we got some questions for you, Daniel. We actually have quite a bit. We went a bit over time.
Oh yeah, sorry about that. I thought that might happen.
It's fine. It's way better that you finish your presentation, of course. But we will quickly get into a few questions, and I suggest that maybe, Daniel, you opened up a bit about it yourself, that people can contact you if they have any further questions. So we'll just take a few, and then they can write to you on Twitter, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. Or I can say a bit after, also if they keep in here, I have time, we can chat it out as well if people want to do that.
Okay,
That's
great. Okay, so the first question is from Christian. He is asking whether you can elaborate a bit about this busy month during the Kickstarter campaign. What specific tasks are you doing? You mentioned a bit about this time capsule and having night shifts, but could you elaborate a bit about it?
Yeah, so one of the things is you can contact artists and some of your allies, people who you can help give some work on the game. You can contact those in advance, but you can't actually contact influencers in advance, because if you have a really good 48 hours, that will help you actually appeal to them. And if they find, if they don't know about your game, if the Kickstarter is the first thing you make about the game, why would they care about the game? They haven't seen it. But if you can show them a Kickstarter where people are going wild, and you don't know that, but if they do, you can take that to them and say, hey, we made this amazing Kickstarter. People are wild for it. Don't you want to, write an article about it? Maybe do a review. So you need to, of course, have a huge list of people who you would like to pick up the game and broadcast it during the campaign. But you need to wait until after, before you can do it. So you're going to use a lot of time contacting a lot of people who you want to show your Kickstarter to, and showing how well it's going, and show that it's a party, and of course they want to be part of that party. So that's one of the things they need to react to, but also the humor. You get a lot of new people in, and they're probably going to make a lot of content on Twitter and whatnot. They're going to maybe make hashtags, or maybe you've made a hashtag for them, and they're going to make a lot of comments. Maybe they're going to make jokes, and you want to pick up on that. You want to engage with your community. It's going to take a lot of your time. And if you hope to get any work done that month, any work at all, it's going to be tough. Yeah, that's my answer.
Okay, great, Daniel. We'll take one more question, and the rest of the questions you can also see in the chat afterwards when we move on. But Frederick is asking a question about your community, and how big was your community before you started your Kickstarter campaign, and how did it sort of grow during the Kickstarter campaign, and where did you start?
Yeah, we had a Discord, pretty small Discord, maybe 50 people, maybe less than that, and we had a Twitter. I think we were near 1,000. I can't remember. I actually think we were lower than that. 700 I'm hearing. So we were at 700 when we started the campaign, and now we are at 2,200. And just during the campaign, I'm pretty sure that we got like several hundreds, like 500 or something. So that means we almost doubled our community during the campaign. And if you don't have that following before, the real disadvantage that you're at, if you don't already have your community, I said it a bit, but the point is, if you don't have a community, you don't know how to engage with them, and you don't have time to have to figure out who actually likes your game when you put it out there. When you're doing your Kickstarter, you need to make sure that you split the arrow consistently. Always speak directly to your audience. They will love you for it. They want you to speak to them, not just to everybody. And they definitely don't want you to speak, a language that they don't understand. You need to engage with them. You need to get them involved. And the best way to do that is to make sure that you speak their language.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Daniel. Jesper, I think we are ready to move on.
Yeah, unless Michael is some sort of champion in fast talking, I can already say now that we are gonna go a bit over time. and I hope that's cool with all of you. Otherwise, remember that we are recording this, and it will at some point probably be available for you guys. But let's just stay here and get ready to hear what Michael Studios has to say about the. Is there a word called legalities? No, that's not the right word. The legal parts.
Let's stay with the legal aspects. Yeah.
The legal aspects of the crowdfunding. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah.
And just please share your screen. And the way that we do it with Michael is that he has encouraged questions throughout of his talk. So if you have any questions, you can either write them and Thomas will find a suitable moment to interrupt, or you can simply say, I have a question. If you really feel like asking Michael yourself, then Thomas will give you the word when it feels right. All right, Michael, are you ready?
Yeah, thanks Jesper for the introduction, and thanks Daniel for a great presentation. It's always tough coming as a legal stick in the mud after a successful case story, talking about the pitfalls of crowdfunding. It makes me kind of feel like, for those of you who've seen Jurassic Park, the second movie, like the guy who's shouting, "Don't go into the tall grass." But that's of course not the main purpose of why I'm here, but it is kind of to tell you that there are certain dangers in tall grass you should be aware of. And now, so do you see my screen correctly? Great. All right. So here. First off, let's talk a bit about why you need to know at least the basis foundations of the legal aspects of crowdfunding. So many of you probably know this scene from one of my favorite games, The Legend of Zelda. This guy provides Link with a wooden sword for his journey because it's dangerous to go alone, right? It is my legal opinion that this old guy is a fraud, because this guy knows that Link is going on a quest that's going to be dangerous, yet he sends him on his way with a wooden sword without any real guidance on where to go or how to get there. And I'm pretty sure that if you zoom in on his face, the slight pixel will have a short smirk in it, like, I know he doesn't get there. So this guy should have provided much more information for Link before he took on his adventure. Like, how's the wooden sword going to beat Ganondorf? He's going to need bombs and boomerangs and bows and magic keys and all sort of obvious things in order to complete his journey. So my job as an attorney is kind of the same as this old guy. I'm going to try to hopefully guide and help entrepreneurs and let them grow in a safe legal environment in order to avoid all physical damages to themselves, basically. Oops. The smart guy would say that Link could actually beat Ganondorf with this wooden sword. And that's true, because you don't need to access all legal aspects of crowdfunding in order to be very successful in your campaign. But the risk of dying as Link if you're trying to beat Ganondorf with a wooden sword greatly increases. And the same goes if you don't understand the legal aspects of crowdfunding. You may risk certain liabilities, which could be reduced before going onto the platform. So basically, hopefully, we can avoid claims and damages mitigated into an unmitigated nuclear explosion, basically. That's kind of a goal for today, is to enlighten you and perhaps reduce the risk of said explosion, or at least cushion the blow if an explosion is going to occur. Now, when trying to map what sort of legal aspects you need to understand in crowdfunding, you may feel like this, and trust me, I get it, because when I talk to game developers and they tell me about their games and the assets behind it, this is kind of like how I feel. So I understand if you have the same for the legal aspects of it. But don't worry, it's not as complicated as it all may seem. And I apologize because now it's going to be a bit more lawyery than it's been up to now. So there are certain things you need to understand before starting your campaign. And the first and most important one is, what kind of legal entity do you operate? Because this has very big importance on what sort of liabilities you're going to have when money gets involved. Second of all, we need to understand, do we have documents that's required to have drafted before we enter into a crowdfunding campaign, or are they something that can wait till later? And lastly, you should always understand the value of your IP as a game dev. I'm sure you guys know, I've been talking a lot about IP and how it's your lifeblood. And that also goes when you're trying to crowdfund. So starting off with the legal entities, many game devs start developing their games during the university studies, and that's fine. The problem is you're going to need at some point some sort of legal entity and incorporation in which you're going to sell your game from, hopefully one day. And there are different types of companies. The first one is an unlimited liability company. It's the partnership, in Danish, Interessentskab, an IS. And then there are the limited liability companies, such as an APS or an AS, in Danish, an anpartsselskab or aktieselskab. And not to be mistaken, a public limited liability company is not the same as a publicly listed company, though they have shared the thing that public liability companies are the only things that can be publicly listed. And that's pretty much the main difference between these two in terms of listing. Now, when it comes to capital, many bootstrapped companies and indie devs will say, we don't have any money to upfront right now, out-of-pocket expense. So we're going to go with the cheapest one to incorporate ourselves as, and that's the partnership. In Denmark, a private limited liability company costs 40,000 Danish crowns, and a public costs 400,000 Danish crowns. So you're kind of paying in order to reduce your liability. I'll get back to that in a second, but this is, of course, the cheapest version of doing it, the partnership. The partnership also doesn't require you to have an employee insurance, in Danish, an arbejdsskadesikring, because if an employee gets hurt or the partner gets hurt, they're personally liable anyways. If you have a limited liability company, you will have to pay an employee insurance. During the early stages, it won't be very high amount to pay in fees, but the later stage you get, and the more employees you actually get, partners you get, shareholders, you may have a risk that the price is going to increase. Now, the most important thing to talk about when choosing which legal entity you want is the liability. Do you want full personal liability, or do you want to limit it to only the amount used during incorporation, which is 40,000 Danish crowns or 400,000 Danish crowns? Personal liability is generally okay as long as you don't have a huge market, a huge customer base, or major transactions going, because once you have money involved, personal liability means that if a party has a claim towards you, they will go for your personal economy, meaning that you could be bankrupt personally if for some reason a third party has a claim towards you on a large sum, which can be, depending on which country the claim is coming from, happen very easily. I'll get back to the liability in a second. Annual accounts are, in Danish, årsregnskab, and all companies, no matter what kind of type you have, needs to create an annual account. The difference being that annual accounts don't have to be public if you are in a partnership, and they have to be public if you're in a limited liability company. So if you don't have much revenue, it doesn't shine very bright to have it publicly available. And having annual account doesn't mean you have to pay for an auditor to audit the accounts. You need to reach certain thresholds before annual accounts need to be audited. And who can own shares? In a limited liability company, one person, company, can own shares. In a partnership, you need to be at least 2 in order to incorporate. It can be both liabilities, limited liability companies, or personal, physical persons. But if you do have a company in order to incorporate a partnership, it is my opinion that you should just use that company, unless it's a holding company, to actually just use as the entity to as a studio entity. Yeah, sorry. And lastly, governance. There are no requirements in a partnership. You don't need specific people to have certain job specifications. But if you go into a limited liability company, you need an executive board, direktion, and if you are into a public limited liability company, you need both an executive board and a board of directors. All right. So the general rule of thumb is when money gets involved, have a limited liability. Because in certain countries, such as the US, you definitely need to have a limited liability because they also grant damages for consequential and indirect losses. As an example, if you have a game with flashing lights and the player falls down from his chair due to epilepsy, he rips his sweater, that's going to be a liability that you may refund. Now, if he falls down from the chair, breaks his ankle, making him unavailable to go to work the next day, that may also be a consequential loss you have to pay. And what if his spouse can't go to her job because they have lost his money for the last day, and so they can't buy gas, so she loses her income? How about that then? That's also in the US something we've seen as a consequential loss. So just to know, you definitely want to limit that liability.
Michael, we have a question for you.
Yeah.
It's from Frederick, and he's asking, is there any benefit to use a limited liability company that owns shares in an IS?
Yeah, so if you do have a limited liability company own shares in a partnership, that means that the liability for you personally is going to be limited, because even if the one who's going to raise a claim towards you wants to go for you personally, they're going to go for the limited liability company, which has, as you know, either 40,000 Danish crowns or 400,000 Danish crowns per incorporation. So that may indirectly limit your liability, but the consequences will also be that certain benefits of being a partnership stops. Like, you have to have publicly available annual accounts if you have a holding company or legal entity being one of the partners in an IS.
Okay, thanks, Michael. I think you can move on.
Great. So the next thing I'd like to talk about is the contracts. And as you know, there are certain contracts already provided by Kickstarter. Kickstarter has a contract by proxy, which set forth the terms between you, the creator, and the backers. And there's also a contract between you and Kickstarter. Now, I would like to show you some of the differences between the contracts, just to show you what to expect of the limitations or in liability you get from the contract provided by Kickstarter contra the contract they provided for themselves. So yeah, I'm not going into a deep dive of the entire contract, but I've underlined certain parts of it, like the best possible conclusion for backers, post an update, work diligently and in good faith, and demonstrate that they've used funds appropriately, been honest, or else explain how they're going to use the funds. All of these main parts of the contract are extremely vague and hardly entails any legal requirements for the creator. Imagine this was being written in the terms of service of a company you're going to buy a product from. So what would you think would be the legal consequences if you actually bought a t-shirt from a company and they say, well, let me give you a brief update on why we'll keep your money and not give you your t-shirt? That's hardly going to be legal. And this actually also goes for the proxy contract. You cannot agree your way around the law. So there are very many consumer protection acts, which also applies to Kickstarter companies. Though it feels like you're better protected than most, it's actually kind of the same. You are just as much protected as any other company that's going to sell a product. And if any of you remember the Kickstarter campaign, I Backpack with Doug Monahan, he ran away with, I think it was $500,000 from backers, but he didn't get sued by a single one of them. And I'll get back to why in a minute, because what happened was he got sued by the American authorities instead. So even though you're not going to get sued by a backers, you may risk getting sued by the authorities, which also applies in Denmark. There's also the crowdfunding campaign, Cool is Cooler, who was a cooling bag with all sorts of mega cool gadgets, such as a blender. They couldn't deliver the product at all, which cost $200 to the backers. And they made a bargain with the American authorities, saying that they'll give back $20 for each bagger who didn't get his or her product. Though it's an empty shell of a company with no revenue and no money, so it's hard to say if they'll ever get a cent from anyone here. And which is also kind of interesting, because the company actually got $13 million in crowdfunding funds. So yet they managed to not get a single product out in time. So that's pretty interesting. And Kickstarter actually earned $1 million in fees on this exact crowdfunding campaign, and of course did not provide them back to the backers in accordance with their terms of service. Which kind of leads me to the next point. This is how Kickstarter's terms of service look, and I've plugged certain parts of it just to illustrate how different it is in wording than the contract you have by proxy. So let's see. To the fullest extent permitted by law, in no event shall Kickstarter be liable for any indirect, incidental, punitive, consequential, special, or exemplary damages of any kind. Wouldn't that be great if that stood in your contract as well? Kickstarter specifically disclaims any and all warranties and conditions of merchantability and non-infringement and fitness for particular purpose. Yeah, I mean, it's great, right? Kickstarter services are legally protected in various ways, including copyrights, trademarks, service marks, patents, trade secrets, and other rights and laws. Would also be great if you had that kind of protection in your contract. Which leads me to, why do we not see any lawsuits on breaching creators? It's very simple. It's due to cost benefit. Now, it's very expensive to have people like me conducting a lawsuit against others. There are a ton of legal documents that need to be prepared, correspondence that needs to be reviewed, and actually meeting up in trial and landing a dispute. It's expensive, very, very expensive. Now, what do you gain if we actually win this sort of lawsuit? Hardly anything, due to limited liability. If there's a company with limited liability and limited funds, you won't receive anything even if you win. You get a bankruptcy declaration against the company, but that doesn't give you anything. You can't eat that. So there's hardly any benefit at all to actually conducting a lawsuit, which is why the authorities are doing it, because they don't need to earn money from a lawsuit. They just want to establish rules. Yeah, so basically that's why we don't see any lawsuits from backers. Now, it is my firm belief that if you were not a limited liability company, the chances or the risks of getting sued are higher. Simply speaking, that people tend to have more money than limited liability companies. So you may end up personally bankrupt if you get sued due to a breach. All right. I've actually skipped over the necessary documents, such as terms of service and privacy policy. I I can make a whole presentation just about terms of service and privacy policies. So the general gist of it is terms of service is a contract in which you limit your liability. Just like you saw on Kickstarter, we're not responsible for indirect or consequential damages, so and so. While the privacy policy is more relevant for the game developer who is in touch with the clients or the customers' personal data, such as integrations to Apple Health Kit or something like that, in which you actually operate with their data. So if you do touch personal data, please make sure you have a privacy policy. Now, next up, understanding the value of your intellectual property is very, very, very important. IP is, as I already mentioned, the lifeblood of a game developer. It is what you sell, it is what you own, it's what you develop. Everything touches on IP. Now, there's different types of IP, and you probably know this already, but in case you didn't, let me give a brief walkthrough of it. Copyright is the safeguards of creative and artistic expressions, such as the story, the sound, the music of a game. In some cases, also the code can be copyrighted. In Europe, we don't need specific actions to be taken in order to safeguard your copyrights, which is a good thing. While in other countries, they don't really respect copyrights that much, which you obviously know from other countries. So, but in Europe and Denmark, we respect copyrights without having it registered. Trademarks, on the other hand, is protection for names and logos associated with the game and its characters. Like, take for example, Square Enix. Square Enix is a trademark. Final Fantasy is a trademark. The Final Fantasy VII game is copyrighted. So just to put it into perspective, the game itself, the story, the artwork is copyright. The name Final Fantasy is trademark. Patents are not usually relevant for game developers, but if for some reason you have designed a very unique and inventive game style or engine, then you perhaps should search for the opportunity to get it patented. Patents are much more protective, but also time limited. Trade secrets, basically, it's such a thing as contracts. You have the publishers, or it could be mailing list data. Information that you receive that you don't want public is called trade secrets. And you obviously don't need to make any public actions in order to protect your trade secrets, as it would be kind of counterintuitive. Right. So IPR used in your campaign, it is very, very important that you actually know if the IP you're using in your campaign belongs to you, or at least it's royalty free. So if you want to create a video and you need a fine mellow tune to set the mood, make sure it's royalty free. Otherwise, you may risk having very heinous people contacting you, such as the set from the Riot Gate. Those of you who know the Chrono Shift Gate. Now, one thing is actually knowing if the IP you use is legal. The next thing is actually knowing if you control and own the IP you think you do. And many game developers, as mentioned, start developing games during their studies, and they have friends helping out. But at some point, they incorporate a company. At that point, you need to make sure that the IP created before incorporation is transferred to the company. Otherwise, the rule is the one who created the IP is the one who owns it, even though it's been developed further during a company, with a company. And just to illustrate, I had a client once who was going to sell did sell his game to a large Japanese publisher. And before he actually incorporated his game, he started developing during studies with a friend. And for a certain part of his product or his assets, he needed his cousin's help. And his cousin developed part of the main character and actually received the IP to it. So when people like me, lawyers who go deep dive into what's called a due diligence in a company to find all the legal red flags, we can see that this company does not own all intellectual property rights to the game. So in order for you to complete this closing of the transaction, you're going to need to actually have a transfer agreement with a cousin. So my client contacted his cousin, who said, "Oh, great news! I love to hear you succeeding in your life, but if you're going to sell this company, I'm going to have to take 10% of the purchase price." Yeah. So we ended up paying approximately 5 million Danish crowns in order to actually get full IP, so we could close the deal. Kind of expensive. So make sure you actually know who owns the IP you're using.
Right, Michael, we have a question from Frederick again. And it's about when should you consider copywriting your game? Is it something you need to worry about in pre-production or at the end of production or at launch?
So copyright, actually the protection of copyright starts the moment your product is finished. You don't have copyright to unfinished works. Like if you're a painter and you paint half a picture, then that's not copyrighted if you're going to finish it later. The copyright exists when the product is finished and having its artistic form, but it appears automatically. You don't need to register your copyrights. You can register copyrights, but you don't have to in order to protect it. So generally, I don't see the reason to register it unless you're going into other countries such as China. In this case, it's very good to have a registered copyright just to show them that you have it, because not everyone understands the European way of copyrights.
So in connection, Michael, to running a Kickstarter campaign and having a lot of material used in your Kickstarter campaign, how would you proceed with that in a legal manner? Would you just use it all in your campaign, and are you protected because you can use the campaign as documentation to that it is that you have ownership of the rights to the property?
Yeah, it's a great question. I wouldn't register it before a crowdfunding campaign. As you said, you can actually control and show that you own a copyright by linking to your crowdfunding campaign. So it's not necessary for you to register it prior to a crowdfunding campaign.
Okay. We have a lot of questions more, but I think you should proceed a bit, Michael.
Yeah. All right. So the next up, to define what sort of legal legislation that's revolving around your type of crowdfunding, you need to understand what sort of structure of crowdfunding you're doing. Now, this is mainly revolving around Kickstarter, so the last two won't be relevant for you, but just to mention, the first option is a donation option. Your backer supports you without receiving anything in return. We also have rules for that in Denmark. The second one is reward-based. Your backers receive a product or a service in return, which in legal perspective is the same as an internet sale. The third option is a loan. Your backers will get their money back, including interests. And the fourth option is what we call equity crowdfunding, which is investment-based. Your backers will receive a type of share in your company as a result of their backing you. So as we are focusing on Kickstarter, we'll just zoom in on the last two, or the first two. So we actually have to differentiate between donations and rewards. Now, what is the difference between a donation and a reward? And when does it come over to either one? Now, the Danish fundraising authority, and yes, we actually have a fundraising authority in Denmark, sets the line between donation and reward in a value perspective. So if the donation exceeds the value of the reward, then you're going to need permission if you want to call it donation, because it's not a donation in their perspective. In reality, we don't know for sure when something is equal out in donation reward, but generally, the fundraising authority is kind of lenient when assessing this. But there are a few key takeaways. And first off, if you're in doubt, ask a question to the authorities. Simply ask permission, or at least ask them to assess whether your crowdfunding campaign requires permission or not. Don't give virtual high fives or other rewards without actual value if you don't have permission from the authorities, because that's going to be a donation. And don't make obvious differences between the value and the donation, like 10,000 Danish crowns for your name on a character hardly coincides. So make sure that you don't do something obvious in this matter. But where the line is, it's kind of hard to say. But as you can see, generally there are quite a lot of different legislation, and these are just the material ones. Now, if you just to touch down on a few points in this, on these legislations, these acts. In terms of the Consumer Act, do not provide guarantees. If you provide words such as "we promise" or "we guarantee," "we warrant that," then the Consumer Act will see this as an objective guarantee in which you have to fulfill, otherwise you'll be liable. And the backers will usually be consumers. So please bear in mind that don't use such terms. In terms of marketing, don't use obvious material that's going to be illegal. Don't use pornography. Don't advertise directly to children. Both of those will be regulated in the Marketing Act. So bear in mind, keep it sober and keep it to an audience, but an adult audience, so to speak. And make sure you understand how your funding is going to be taxed. I'm no auditor, but there is a difference between getting taxed by donations and getting taxed by rewards, which is a sale in Denmark. So there's a difference here, and make sure your auditor knows, if you have an auditor, make sure he knows the difference in tax. Otherwise, you may risk penalties. Finally, make sure that your company is actually equipped to handle fulfillment of the rewards you set in your tires. Like, I see a tendency towards game studios making physical rewards such as t-shirts, which is fine, which is great, but make sure that you understand the implications of having physical rewards. Are you able to package 100,000 t-shirts and send them? Are you able to package and ship t-shirts to Uganda? Are you able to package and ship t-shirts through the US customs? And how will that affect your financial statement afterwards? So if you actually tend to provide physical assets to the US, if you're going to get caught in the customs, you may actually lose a large amount of your funding during the crowdfunding campaign. So just make sure that you understand if you're able to actually follow through with your rewards. So we're delayed. What do we do? As already mentioned, the risk of getting sued during a crowdfunding campaign is very low because of the cost benefit. But that doesn't mean the same as it can actually destroy your company if you're late, because bad publicity is not good publicity, no matter what people say. if you're going to get bad reviews on Steam because of a late demo or whatever, that's going to ruin it for everyone else who's going to see it later, because people tend to flock towards success and stay away from bad games. That's just how it is. So you don't want a bad audience from the beginning. So mitigate anger and frustration by continuously communicating with the backers. If for some reason your T-shirt can't be provided because of China is locked down due to COVID-19, please provide that information to your backers. The T-shirts are coming, trust us. Most rewards are delayed between 1 to 90 days. So the backers and Kickstarters actually know or expect some sort of delay. That doesn't get them riled up. What gets them riled up if there's a delay and they aren't informed about why there's a delay. So put resources into your content management and your backer management during your campaign. If trouble gets real, call a lawyer. It's much easier for a person like me to come in before the fire is exploded as a fireman than it is afterwards. And I had a client once who actually funded his product through a crowdfunding campaign, but shortly after he received a subpoena, Danish stævning, because a huge telecompany believed that he used their IP, that's their patents, without license. So he should probably have contacted us before he actually went into communication with the telecompany, because he provided a lot of information they didn't need to have. So if trouble gets real, call a lawyer.